guys, I'm here with Jessie Hawk of Hawk Home Inspections, and I know that you've all had a lot of questions about home inspectors, what they do, what they cover, and we're here to find some answers. Jessie, what is your background and how did you get into home inspection?
So actually, I have been doing construction or carpentry work on the Outer Banks since like the late 90s when I was in high school here. I got into home inspections just kind of by accident. It just seemed like a different way to take my career at the time, to avoid depending on being the guy who swings the hammer every day or climbs the ladder or climbs the roof. Just something different in the same industry.
I would imagine that background, actually seeing how the house goes together from ground zero up, gives you a good insight when you're going through and then doing the inspections.
Yeah, absolutely. You can actually be a home inspector without any previous knowledge or experience, but it's so much more beneficial for me to have the experience I have.
I can imagine. So can you describe what you typically do with a walkthrough process when you're going through and doing the home inspection?
So like during the inspection itself, if you'd ever tag along during an inspection, a lot of times it might look like a home inspector is not doing much of anything. What they're really doing is looking at hundreds of different things at the same time. Some of it's kind of more hands-on when you're taking something apart, like an electrical panel. Other things are really just observing. You know, a home inspection is really a visual observation. And then there's some things that we can test and operate, and there's other things that we do not.
What are some of the things that maybe you wouldn't normally look at or be able to inspect during that process?
The biggest thing that would prohibit the ability of an inspector would be like personal storage. So people, if it's a home that hasn't somebody occupying the home while it's for sale, they tend to have a lot of personal storage. Those items, in some cases, like the garage might be full from one end to the other because they're preparing to vacate their house. That's probably the most common thing that limits the inspection. Other things may be just accessibility. Sometimes the way a house is constructed, there may not be an attic access, or there may not be a way to actually inspect certain areas of the home. So that would be the second most common thing, I would say.
As part of a normal home inspection, do you typically go under crawl spaces? And of course here on the Outer Banks, so many of our houses are built up on pilings. But if it were on a crawl space, would you go under a house generally? Yes,
absolutely. It's one of those things where it's probably not my favorite thing to do, but it's really how you learn so much about a property. I enter crawl spaces. If I can fit inside the crawl space, I go in and I go as far as I can go. The only thing that would limit the ability of an inspector in a crawl space might be if there's something dangerous. There have been situations where there might be standing water under the house. If I see low-hanging wires, or if it's an older home where they might have knob and tube electric, I'm going to limit where I go, especially if there's standing water under the house, because just for my own safety. But otherwise, enter a crawl space every time. It's really the best way to learn about the foundation and structure of a home.
Okay, what is the strangest thing that you've ever found in a crawl space or attic?
I do find some pretty weird things. Probably the strangest thing I can't even speak of because I think the house is still under contract. So. But I did one time I was in a crawl space and I was looking around. I saw a lot of rat droppings or mouse droppings, and I was looking around. I saw some snake skins, and then I looked underneath me and I was actually sitting on top of a 6-foot live snake that was underneath the vapor barrier that I was on top of. And so I left the crawl space after that.
This is when you realize home inspectors are not paid enough for what they do.
Yeah, I think in that case, that home had a real infestation. Over like $16,000 worth of electrical damage.
Oh my gosh. So are there any specialized tools or maybe technology that you use that your average homeowner, if they said, you know, oh, I don't need a home inspection, I'll just take a look at it myself. What maybe do you have access to?
The back of my truck is full of tools. Some of the tools I rarely ever use, but I just keep them there because those off chances that I'm going to need a very specific tool, I'll have it. You know, I use a lot of tools that anybody could get from their local, like Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Lowe's. But I think a really big thing for me is having higher quality tools. And also, I'm using them so often that I'm very familiar with my tools. And so I feel really confident and understand their range and their capability. And so when you're using something every day, like the difference of a home inspector versus a homeowner is that I'm doing this every day.
Right.
And so I'm not just going out once and testing something or using a tool one time and have nothing to compare that to. I have years of knowledge of comparing it to what I've been seeing when I test it and use it other places.
Right.
So it's really, that's the difference, I would say.
Right.
Also, there are just some things a homeowner's not going to have. Maybe infrared cameras would be a good example. Right. I do use infrared cameras, but you know, honestly, most of the time I can find defects without using the infrared camera.
And I've seen you go through, because I like to attend the home inspection sometimes with, I don't know what it is, the way where you put it up to the HVAC and you can read the temperature differences and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always found that really fascinating, some of the tools that the home inspectors use.
Yeah, definitely use infrared thermometer a lot. That's one of those tools, again, that when you use it hundreds or thousands of times, you know what to expect. Yeah. So I'm very particular about using the same brand, the same tool all the time. So I actually buy 2 or 3 of the same one. That way, when I have an issue with one or if I lose one, I have the same one.
How do you generally inspect a roof? Is that something that you go up on? Do you use a drone?
Yeah, so I try to never use a drone. Okay. Honestly, I think the best way to inspect a roof is from the roof. Okay. It's not always an option, right, but probably, you know, 9 times out of 10 or even more, I'm climbing on the roof. Right. I don't want to put myself at danger, but there are just times where I know there's something that I need to see and walk on, right, like personally. Right. So instead of trying to inspect that from the ground or from a drone, I'm going to make every effort to walk on the roof. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so Jessie, what would typically not be included in a home inspection? Things
that would not be in a home inspection. The most obvious thing for me would be low voltage electrical systems. So let's say you have outdoor speakers, your doorbell, things like that. That's actually beyond the scope of a home inspection. Okay. Other things that may be beyond the scope of a home inspection would be, depending on your licenses, like you can only take certain systems or components apart if you're licensed to do so.
Okay. Give me an example. What type of system?
So an HVAC system, I'm not going to hook up a computer to it or test the refrigerant levels or anything like that. It's going to be more from an operational standpoint. I'm going to operate the system and test it for to see if the temperature range is within the expected numbers that we're looking for. And I'll be listening for other things as well and looking for other defects, but there's going to be a limited inspection when you can't take certain things apart. So an HVAC technician could go in and take all the covers off. Right. There's certain covers that are readily accessible that a home inspector like myself will take off and take a closer look inside. But there's some, depending on the brand or manufacturer, that you're not going to take apart. And that's just for my own safety. Right. So, you know, North Carolina Home Inspector Licensure Board they have a standards of practice, and that's really what everything is based off of. But I do go above and beyond that regularly. Okay. So if a homeowner wants to do a home inspection and they want to include things like pools and hot tubs, for example, what about like fireplaces, things of that nature? Are you open to doing those type of things? Yes, I inspect fireplaces, pools, spa, water features. You know, some houses have a really fancy pool with all kinds of water features. Yep. The limitations there, and I think limitation is the key word, is that during a home inspection, there are going to be certain limitations, and we don't know those until we're actually at the property. Right. And some of those things might be, if it's a gas fireplace, if there's no fuel tank hooked up, we're obviously not going to be able to operate it, right? But we still inspect it and look for things. Whatever I can do, I'm going to do the most I can based on the situation or the current condition or configuration while I'm at the house. Okay. Sometimes a homeowner might be there and they might be able to connect something or turn something on. Right. That can be handy. But, you know, like this time of year, especially with pools, if a pool is winterized, which this happens a lot, I'm still inspecting the pool. Right. Actually, I inspect the pool regardless of whether my client wants me to or not. Okay. Because I don't want to have to go back and look at it later, right, and then charge my client for something that I could have done while I was there. Right. And so when a property has one, I'm inspecting it and doing as much as I can. When a pool is covered, like this time of year, I'll try to pull back the cover a little bit so I can get in and look at things. Sometimes I get permission from the owner where I can actually open the pool back up. I'll take the cover off. I don't fill the pool because it takes days to fill a pool. So we try to think ahead, and this time of year what I would recommend is contacting a pool service company, have them go out and fill the pool back up so I can operate it during the inspection. Things like that. But limitation is really, that's the key word when it comes to certain systems like that, because if it's not set up ready to be operated, I'm not going to be the one who's trying to turn it back on. Unless it's very simple and I've been given permission to do that.
So something that happened to me years ago, early in my career, and it was not you, but I think this is just kind of interesting, is I had a home inspection done on one of my listings, and the home inspector noted that the refrigerator did not work. What it was is the refrigerator was unplugged, but because of liability purposes, he didn't want to plug that in, which makes total sense. I get it. But I would say for our homeowners, if there is a light bulb that's out, these guys, that's not their job to go and change things out. We need to make sure that things are plugged in. We need to make sure that the light bulbs are working so that they can then do their job.
So sometimes I do carry around cases of light bulbs. And when there are fixtures that are easy for me to get to, if I can just screw a light bulb in to see that it works, then I'll just leave the light bulb there. Because on these, we have so many investment properties. So many people have no idea whether their lights are working on the house or not, because it's been maybe 3 months since the last renter was in it, especially this time of year. But I will make an effort to go do that, but I'm not going to start taking things apart to change a light bulb, So I do carry around light bulbs, and what's funny is when I have them, I go through them really fast. So that's because so many people have lights that are out. But yeah, it's definitely probably the most common thing I find is the light bulbs are burned out.
That is one of the things when we go to list a house, we have to put in light bulbs, and we have to make sure that the light bulbs match. So one of the things I've always wondered about is codes are constantly changing. You know, I always tell people you can build a house and get your certificate of occupancy today and the code can change tomorrow. How does that factor in when you're doing your home inspection?
One good thing to understand about home inspections, especially in North Carolina, is that a home inspector is not going to ever talk about building code. There are actually very strict rules about if I wanted to mention building code in my report, I would have to cite the code from the current code. And I'd have to also cite it from the code from when the house was built. Then I also would have to have a photocopy of each, not just a picture of, specifically a photocopy. So the state really doesn't want home inspectors talking about building code. What I do personally is I talk about building standards and safety standards and things like that. So I use a slightly different terminology to avoid that tricky spot where I'm not supposed to talk about building code. Every home inspector, we do continuing education, just like realtors do. And so that's one way we are constantly up to date on things that change. Also, it's really staying in the loop in your local area. We have certain codes or expectations on the Outer Banks they don't have in Raleigh, or vice versa. And so in that instance, it's really from experience working on homes in this area. Also talking to builders and staying in touch with people who are currently working on homes in our area. It's really important to stay up on all that stuff and be fresh on what's changing or what's going on.
What would you say would be something that is common that you would see as a safety concern? What's kind of a typical thing that you find here on the Outer Banks?
Most common safety issues are all deck related.
That's what I was thinking. Loose handrails, low handrails, things of that nature.
I mean, the problem is we live in a salty, corrosive environment. So nails are failing, screws, even stainless steel fails on the Outer Banks. So you have loose railings, loose pickets. You know, wood is organic, and wood splinters and cups and bends and does all kinds of things because every piece of wood is different than the other, right? So a lot of our railings and decks are all made from wood. That's definitely the most common safety thing. Other than that, I would say electrical items are always showing up in my report with safety concerns. It's not for me to decide whether a homeowner thinks it's important or not, but you know, a house built in the 70s is not going to have the same standards for electrical receptacles that we do now. So now all kitchens, bathrooms, exterior areas, anything near a laundry machine or a sink, they're all going to be ground fault.
Right.
circuit interrupted.
Right.
And that's to protect you from being electrified. But a home in the 70s didn't have that.
Right.
So.
Well, and it seems like it's pretty common for GFIs to not trip. That's something that I see on a lot of home inspections. But relatively easy fix to swap out the receptacle. But again, just something that would be noted on the inspection.
Yeah, you know, specifically those type of items, GFCI receptacles on the outside of a house, they have a maximum 15-year life. Right. So a 30-year-old home with an old receptacles, a bunch of them are not going to be working.
So one of the things that I've always wondered about is, you know, a lot of the homes here on the Outer Banks are older. Are there specific things that you look for when you're inspecting an older home versus a newer home?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when I'm going out to do a home inspection, I try to never predict what I'm going to find, because I think it puts you in the wrong mindset. I may look at a listing and think, oh, this house is really old, set myself up for failure because I'm thinking it's going to have a lot of things wrong with it. Right. It could have been totally remodeled, and a lot of things could be updated. Yep. So I don't ever want to go to a property thinking I already know what I'm looking for. But once I'm at a home and I start to see, then I start to gauge based off materials that are used what I might be finding. An age of a home does tell you some things like the probability of asbestos, probability of lead paint, and you know, these are things that buyers need to know about. In many cases, those items are not going to be a concern unless they're disturbed, and you can't tell if there's lead paint if there's 5 layers of latex on top of it. It's going to be very hard to find it. But on an older home on the Outer Banks, some of the most common items that we find would be, if it's a piling foundation, creosote pilings, which are the ones, if you ever walk up to a piling, it could be like a telephone pole looking shape. Right. It might smell kind of like tar. Right. So that would be a much older piling that was used a long time ago on the Outer Banks. Things like that.
Polybutylene plumbing, I know, is a big thing for homes that are built in, what, the 80s or so?
Yeah. So on the Outer Banks, polybutylene plumbing, the most recent home I've ever found it in was 1996. I have not found it in any home after that, but I have heard people say they were doing some work on their jacuzzi tub and the house was built in 1998 and they found polybutylene pipe, and they want to know, how is that possible? Right. That's because those spa tubs were manufactured and already plumbed, and so maybe it was built, the tub was manufactured in 1996 or 95, or the manufacturer had a surplus of polybutylene left over, so they're still using it. So in a house that was built in 98, you might still find that a tub like that would have polybutylene pipe, but the house is not going to have it.
I gotcha. Yeah, and that's become a really hot topic with insurance these days, is polybutylene plumbing. Some of the insurance companies no longer want to write a policy if the house has polybutylene. So if you're looking at a home like that, you definitely have to calculate that into your offer price and know that it's something you'll probably want to update pretty quickly.
Yeah, and with older homes, so people think the Outer Banks doesn't have that many older homes, but we actually do. We have quite a lot. And some of them date back to the 1800s. Things that you'll find, it's very area specific, and again, it just comes from experience working on a lot of homes on the Outer Banks. I mean, I've been doing work here since I was a kid. And so I've seen a lot of this stuff now. You know, you crawl under a house built in 1920, it's probably built on brick columns. And the mortar they used then, it was like from the sand on the ground, on the lot, you know, next to where they were building it. So on houses like that, you can take your finger and the mortar just crumbles away. It's just totally deteriorated. Other things you find is, we have shipwrecks here, Graveyard of the Atlantic. What they used to do to save money is, when a ship would come ashore, they would disassemble it, take the pieces of the ship. Now they're going to build their house that they've been building for the last couple of years. They're going to just put those pieces of ship into the house. I find that a lot.
I sold a house last year, oceanfront down in Nags Head. It was one of the classic, beautiful old houses, and they proudly told me that that house was completely constructed with stuff that had washed up on the beach.
Yeah, I've
seen. It was really cool.
Seen quite a few of those. It's really neat. People are always amazed at how a piece of wood over 100 years old could not be decayed or have termites or anything, but that's, again, being familiar with building materials. We use fast growth lumber now for most things. If you look at a home built in the 1920s on the Outer Banks, you might find some really dense hardwood
right.
that we just don't use as much anymore.
Right.
So yeah.
That's the thing. It's not even as much about just hiring a home inspector. A lot of times it's hiring a home inspector that knows about this area and specific things for the Outer Banks that maybe you're going to pick up on that, say, somebody coming from a couple hours away wouldn't necessarily pick up on.
It's really hard to teach those things on the internet.
Yeah.
It's really from hands-on. If you don't have experience working around it, you might not even know what you're looking at.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Same thing with agents. You know, sometimes we'll have agents that want to come down from Raleigh, but they don't really understand our flood zones and things of that nature. So definitely being local and living here, being in the trenches every day helps for sure.
That's really it, right? On the Outer Banks, it's like work with a local, with everything, right?
Yeah,
100%. Locals are the ones with the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So Jessie, when you are done with your home inspection, how do you communicate that back to the buyer? How do they get that information?
So when I'm finished, I'll create a report and send it to my client. The report's going to have comments and photos to accompany the comments. I really stick to what is required of me by the state. What I would say the best way to really understand a home inspection report is to actually have a conversation with a home inspector after getting the report. A report is really, it's a glimpse of the home inspection. I'm not going to write paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs explaining what exactly is going on. And some of that's for liability reasons. I'm going to just tell you what you need to hear. And most of the time, if you follow everything in the report, which is going to recommend you to different professional specialists, general contractor, electrician, plumbing contractor, if you follow your report, you're going to be in really great shape. But also when you get your report, if you don't call me or your home inspector, then you're not getting the full picture of what's really going on. You know, it's really important to remember a home inspection report is negative by nature. It doesn't tell you the good things about a house. And for liability reasons, I'm not going to put the good things in the report either, because I don't want to be the guy they blame later when they say, you said the house was great, right? It's not going to be in my report.
Even though it may be a great house.
It might be a great house, but you know, it's not going to be written in the report for liability reasons. But I'm much more loquacious on the phone or in person. For people who come to the home inspection, I will spend as much time as they need or want at the property. A lot of times, you know, people want to be there during the inspection, and I always tell them, you know, 2 or 4 or 6 sets of eyes looking at something is better than just one. And I always encourage buyers to spend time on the property during the inspection. And I cover whatever I find, but I also want to hear if they have any questions about things that they found. Most of the time, buyers are really worried about things that they shouldn't be worried about. You know? They really don't know. They don't know. They're really worried about whether the hot tub works or not. And, you know, the roof could be falling in, but they're really focused on the hot tub. So, like, you know, the things they're the most concerned for them are not always the most concern for me. You know, those conversations are important, I think, especially once you receive the report. The conversation you have afterwards with the home inspector, that's, I think, the most important conversation.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's really common here because so many of our buyers are coming from out of town that they aren't necessarily able to attend the home inspection. So that's when I think it's nice to know that your agent, a lot of times, I know I go pretty much every time if my client can't make it, and you're able to walk me through and show me things, because it's one thing, like you say, if you're looking at a photo, but if you can actually point it to me and say, okay, this is what I'm talking about, it gives us a much better, clearer picture of the situation.
Yeah, there are definitely times where a video or FaceTime with a client does help. I can't predict what I'm going to find on a property. And a lot of times, like you said, the clients can't be here. It's very common. The next best thing, if you're not going to be here, a lot of times they'll get their inspection report, and then the clients will already have a plan to come down and see the property, and now they have a report in their hand. And so then they will walk around the property and look at things. So that's another way to handle that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.